today, in which we're going to be thinking about the role of the tenant in all of this after the tragedy of Grenfell. Clearly a wake-up call to this sector and, of course, the government. There has been a far greater focus on engaging, understanding and involving the tenant, hearing their voices. No, more than that, really listening to what they are saying and then acting on their concerns. That is the challenge. Last week, you may have seen the launch of the new rug review on the private rental sector, which found that while most tenants think their housing in PRS is okay, the tenure also includes a shadow market in housing where violence, exploitation, trafficking and modern slavery can be found. And that review included a warning of endemic rent arrears, evictions and slum tenure with the squeeze on welfare. And the Green Paper on social housing includes a warning from the Prime Minister, repeated here this morning, that social tenants too often feel ignored, stigmatised and treated with little respect by remote, disinterested landlords. Now, I'm sure none of you are remote, disinterested landlords, but it's not a rosy picture, and this session is an opportunity to focus on tenants and an opportunity to consider how to improve matters. We have a brilliant panel, as always, to discuss this. At this end, we have Aasia Nisa, who's the Community Engagement and Scrutiny Manager at Sovereign Housing Association, with a particular interest in resident involvement. Beyond Aasia, we have Alison Inman, who is the current President of the Chartered Institute of Housing. They've allowed her in, goodness knows how, the CIH here, but anyway, we're delighted that Alison is here. A Director of Tpas, which some may remember as the Tenants Participation Advisory Service, but she's always been a powerful advocate for social housing. John Giesen is the Chair of Tpas, taking up that role after really 48 years, it says on my piece of paper, in social housing, including 10 years as Chief Executive of B3 Living. 50 next, well, that is extraordinary. That's almost as long as Michael Heseltine. And finally, Samia Badani is Chair of the Nottingdale Residents Advisory Board, an organisation operating in North Kensington in the shadow of Grenfell Tower, of course. We are going to be using Slido for this session. Do please log on, slido.com, put your questions in there. They'll pop up on the screen. During the course of our conversation, I will be referring to those, and hopefully we can take some from real people as well as some from the computer screen. So I thought we might just sort of think about where we are to start with. I mean, it does feel that this is a real moment, an opportunity to reshape the sector and include the tenant in a genuine and meaningful way in the processes. Aasia, how do you consider where we are now? What are the opportunities that lie around us, given the kind of thing the Prime Minister was saying this morning?
I think from a tenant's point of view, I think we have to look at them very much as our customers. I think there needs to be a change in attitude with regards to how we engage with our residents. Us as a landlord has to tailor our services towards them much more effectively. And we have to listen to them. We don't listen to them. We may engage with them, but actually we don't listen to them. So what we have to do is actually build up a culture of listening and understand how they feel as part of that journey when they're connecting with us. When they're ringing us up around a service, how do they feel? Are we just going through the motions, or are we genuinely listening to what they're saying? So building a culture which is based on feedback and listening, I think that's the way we need to move forward, because I think Grenfell was very much illustrating that they engaged, but they didn't listen. And for us, I think moving forward, building on that culture and creating that trust between us as a landlord and them as a customer is really important.
Maybe we should come to you next. You're obviously acutely conscious of the before and the after around the Grenfell tragedy. I was speaking to you just moments before we came up here and asked whether, actually had there been a transformation, had there been a change between the relationship between the local authority and the people living in that part of North Kensington. Well, tell people here, has there been the transformation that one might have expected?
Thank you. I mean, the only transformation really
Hold up. Can you get the microphone on? Yeah. Oh. Silenced. The voice of the tenant has been silenced before we have even begun.
I couldn't make it up.
Can you hear?
Can you hear me?
No. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll come to the voice of the tenant very, very soon. Alison.
Yeah, you don't listen.
Alison. That's brilliant. You have your own very special tenant microphone. That's what that is.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
The only thing that's really transformed, it's our local people, actually. Self-belief. We operate in a context of zero trust with the local authority. I think we soon realized that we're expecting a local authority to change. We expect the local authority to work in a way it's never worked before. So it wasn't so much for them to change, but for us to change. On the 14th of June, really, it's a reset button that we pressed, and it completely, and out of the tragedy, something positive came out. Local residents felt empowered. We've tested out a new model of local representation. And I've got to say, I wanted to say thank you to members, to those housing associations who did the right thing, who on the 14th of June knocked on the doors of their tenants while the local authority was nowhere to be seen. I think, yes, the relationship with the local authority hasn't improved, but I've got to say I'm pleased that we're in an extraordinary position where we work in different ways with the other social landlords. They've been very supportive. They've helped us develop a new model of service delivery, a new hub, which is 100% resident-led, where we are more, it's no longer about engagement, but it's about co-creation and co-deciding, because engagement, I think, is overused. Tenants are quite cynical about it, because I can engage with you, I can have a meeting with 3 people, and that's engagement. People want more. You need to believe in those local people. We've got great skills in this community, and we testament that it works. We've actually been told that we're competing with the local authority, which is a good thing.
Can I I just need to understand a bit more about how this works on the ground. So, I mean, clearly the tenants don't own the properties. So obviously there is an owner, which may be the local authority, and yet you're saying it's 100% tenant-led, but surely at some point you actually do have to engage, and you have to ensure you're being listened to by the various organisations that are responsible for making sure that the building is safe, that people's concerns are listened to.
Well, that's the new model of local representation. What we call the Nottingdale Residents Advisory Board is a local management board. So we've got representative of 11 residents associations in Nottingdale. That includes tenants from housing association, RBKC, freeholders, private tenants, and leaseholders. And the idea is that we take back ownership of our neighborhood and we hold them accountable. So what we've managed to revisit our relationships with those local landlords, including TfL, which is a major landlord, but also the CCG, RBKC, and we're saying to them, if you are going to come to our neighborhood, we want to see social value. And what we're telling to housing association, look, we'll do a better job at engaging with your own tenants. And we work quite well with getting housing association to pull resources together, because we are all responsible in regenerating the area, creating stronger communities and making them more sustainable. It's not only our BKC or this particular landlord, and I think if we pull resources together, we have better ways of commissioning services, we get value for money. So this is what we've been experimenting, and London Assembly has described our hub as the phoenix of the Grenfell Tower and fire, and I wanted to say, well, out of the tragedy, there's a better ways possible. We suffered enough, and we're happy to do what it takes. And I think it's not only empowering us local residents, but it's about empowering you, the people who work for you, because that bureaucracy is what is killing us. So we found that better, and I hope we're more optimistic. And when RBKC is ready to change, the door is open.
I like the idea that the power has completely shifted. Why not?
Actually, there's been a shift, and I think it's about treating us the same level, because we tell housing association, look, in terms of planning permission, you're going to bring that value to our area. We're going to stand with you. All the residents, whether they are your tenants or not, we will stand with you. We will stand and speak for you to the GLA or different bodies. It's about redefining that relationship. We are partners, so it's
Okay.
not about engagement.
All right. John, will you hold on? It's your own personal microphone.
okay.
Yes, I know. Thrilling. John, I'm really interested in what sort of bubbled up out of the tragedy in terms of the relationships and an organisation that's developing in North Kensington. Is that replicable? Could that be a sort of model for the kind of things that should be happening all over the country?
I think it's replicable in as much that what we need is a mindset change. So we need to stop thinking we're the professionals, therefore we know best. And I think it's interesting, for example, that the panel has more professionals on it than tenants, which is interesting given what we're talking about.
Do you own your own home?
Yes.
All right.
Have
So,
I ever
do
been
you
a
own your own home?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So do I. Yes.
Yeah.
So none of us are. You rent, presumably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both a tenant and a professional, and you've got lots of you tenants who are professionals.
Yeah, no,
just
absolutely.
to say,
Absolutely
you
right.
tick 2 boxes.
Yeah. No, absolutely right. I think we have moved away from valuing the experience of our tenants in a way that sees their experience as something important to an organisation, and I count housing associations along with local authorities and ALMOs. They're all in the same boat, and there's plenty of good examples, but there's far too many mediocre or bad examples of that.
Taking Aasia's point about, listening or engaging is not enough. Listening and listening in a way is not really enough either, and just nodding. You do actually have to really understand what is this person trying to tell us from their perspective, and then acting upon it.
Yeah, I think giving people a voice is a start, but giving them a voice and then not doing anything about it and not making them part of the decision process. So, boards have looked at having developers, accountants, lawyers, and value that professional experience. But they have no idea what it's like to live on an estate. Many of them won't have actually been and talked to tenants, actually understood what it's like to live day by day on that estate. And actually valuing that experience and input on a par with those other skills is a start. I have to say, I think many organisations use the rent cuts to move away from it because it was an excuse to move away from it. Plenty didn't, but some have seen it as an easy option. I've heard some organisations say, we don't need those people to tell us what to do. I've heard some people say tenants don't pay enough rent to have an excellent service. Good enough is what we should be aiming for, and that way we can develop more. And indeed, I think the government over the last 10, 15 years has pushed organisations to do that. So it's very welcome that we've had a shift, but there's an awful long way to go to rebuild the sort of trust that Samia was talking about.
Alison, Inman, one of the issues, it seems to me, is that we listen to the voices of tenants. Obviously, you can't listen to every single tenant, or at least that's extremely difficult. In the end, it's going to be a representative person who comes forward, who probably offers themselves to be on the committee and does that. And then the question has to be, well, is this particular person genuinely representative of the views, or does it happen to be just the mouthy one who's got a real thing about, birds or bats or whatever it might be?
I think the whole thing about residents on boards is interesting, because we ask people to volunteer to join a board because of their tenure, and then when they're on the board we say forget that you're so you come up through this route. Once you're a board member, you're a board member. You're not there to represent the views of a group of people. You are there to act in concert with other people, and I think that's quite a confusing message sometimes. We say, particularly where residents are elected onto a board. So if you feel you have a mandate and then you become a board member, but you're told that you're not there to represent the views of other board members, it's quite easy. We can deal with it, but it needs talking about, and people need to be very, very clear. I think there's not one way of doing it. So you interact with your beneficiaries, and frankly, let's be really honest, the people who pay your wages. People who I think we need to remember are working incredibly hard to pay wages. And I think sometimes we forget that, we disconnect that. The bigger our businesses get, or the more complex they get, I think we lose that link. I think we stop thinking, how many hours does a woman who's working in home care have to work in order to pay for that service, for that salary, for whatever. I think it's easy to lose the link with the community.
I suppose that, I mean, the difficulty here is also about, you know, a level of expertise at, say, a board level. That somebody's lived experience in rented accommodation is hugely important. Their understanding of the daily risks and challenges is massively important for that board to understand. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have that big picture understanding of how this housing association fits into the wider sector and the regulation. And it's almost unreasonable to expect them to.
But we need everything. Good governance works well when you have a diversity of thought and of experience and of skills around the board table. It looked at one point as if when associations got more complex, and obviously we're looking at risk and we're thinking treasury is really, really important and we need people who understand numbers. It looked at one point as if diversity was going to be, well, actually, have you got 6 accountants?
Yeah.
And, you've got a lesbian accountant, an accountant with a disability, and an accountant who happens to be black. I mean, that is not diversity. Real good decisions around the board table are made when you have people who are coming from completely different areas of life. So the person who does understand the money, but also the person who understands that community. That's when governance works really, really well.
Yes.
And I think good boards now, I mean, we all have skills matrices, don't we, when we're looking at board recruitment. I think on there has got to be experience of living within the communities that we are here to serve.
And do you think we need to have legislation to that effect? I mean, how would you like to see the sort of social housing green paper move in terms of tenant voice and ensuring that they are listened to properly in those kind of organisations?
I think we need something modern. I don't think that looking back to can we re-establish the National Tenants' Voice that we had in, for a very short period of time, 2008 to 10, I don't think that's particularly helpful. But I do think we need something that is independent and resourced. So, tenants pay for membership of the National Housing Federation, and I think associations need a trade body and they need a strong trade body, but I also think there is a need for something that is representative of, I'm not a fan of referendums because obviously we had one and it was a bit shit.
If they come up with the answer you want, they're great.
So it's not about everybody voting. It's not as if let's ask every social tenant what they want and whatever. But just to make sure that not just associations, but government, the regulator, different arms of the state and civic society just hear a different set of voices, and there is enough talent to then work a way through. And reach better decisions. Okay,
some of you have already been on Slido. Oh, hello. What have you got to say, John?
Well, I think it's a mindset, but it won't happen just by a code of governance or regulation. But the code of governance or regulation will actually address people's minds. It won't necessarily get to their hearts, but it's a starting point. So
the legislation, or whatever it might be, or guidance or something, should say what?
Well, I think, as Alison said, it shouldn't be one size fits all. So personally, I don't think a league table is the answer, because I think the league table itself will lead to a tick box mentality of, have you got one of these? Yes, you pass, go. Instead of which, I think the regulator needs to be sufficiently resourced to know what good looks like, and good will vary from location to location. It will vary across the country, but it's important that it's actually seen as something that's as important as good governance or financial viability.
Well, interestingly, the top question on Slido at the moment, so if we could put the questions up, the top question, the Green Paper suggests a KPI monitoring effective resident engagement. How do you think this should be measured? Which is sort of where we're at. Samia, in terms of a key performance indicator.
Why me?
Well, what would it be?
Well-
How can we measure this is good, this is not good?
Can I just go back? I think we can wait for. I'm also on the Shutter Commission, so watch the space. Something is going to be happening. So we've been looking at how to give tenants a voice. I think we can look at what we have, and I think we don't have to rely on government to change. You've got residents' associations. What we learned on the 14th of June, what happens to local residents' associations in Nottingdale is that, our lives were flipped upside down. So as residents' association, we found ourselves doing things we'd never done before. So I think it's quite important to look at the remit of residents' association, new residents' associations, because it's easy to set up residents' association and you meet your targets, you've gone that number. And what your expectations of residents' associations, because bar from a few £100 annual grant just for us to have social event or a card club, there's more we can do. Residents' association actually delivering workshop around health and well-being, actually achieving public health outcome. But it's not just about housing association, it's also local authorities, because you both have there's an expectation that you will build the capacity of your tenant and your residents. So do not underwrite those residents' association. I think we need to look again at what is it and how you can work with them in partnership, because we can have a national representation. But what we've put in place is a model of local representation, because let's face it, RBKC can't do it on your own. You can't do it on your own. So we wanted a system that can auto-fix itself. So you've got this local knowledge, local presence, and work with your residents' associations. But
If you had to have a metric though, if you had to have some way of saying this is good, what would you be measuring as a way of saying, yeah, that works?
can I tell you about our AAA rating? Because because of the reset button, we put.
But that would be one way of doing it, wouldn't it? You just ask tenants
So-
whether they feel it's working.
Well, you need to hear what the A stands for.
Oh, okay.
So we developed a new model of service delivery, which is responsive and resident-led, and it's AAA, so it's got to be appealing, adaptable, accountable.
Okay.
And we do this with service providers, and you lose your A's and your rating. And I think what we have, because we have, we put services and we've got engagement at the same time, so it's rated, and then the providers go. And I think it comes from that place where actually it's the service users who are at the heart of that decision-making process. And it might be for you to look at the decision table if you have tenant representations there, because don't get me wrong, we want value for our money. You know, we want you to save as much money as you can. So you have to trust us that we want the same thing, and we can hold those contractors or providers adaptable. So we have to have a real say, not tell us what we think,
Okay.
because we can tell you until our face turns blue, but we need to be co-deciding for certain issues.
Partnership. John.
Well, can I go back a few years when I was at B3 Living, a housing association in Hertfordshire? 2 London boroughs had stock in Broxbourne, and one of them was looking at disposing of it to us. So we went along to residents' meetings, and they said, "Why should we trust you? You know, we don't. You know, our landlord, the local authority in London, had broken promises, had done all sorts of things. That why should we trust you? Why would you be any different?" So we said, and I think it's your AAA, don't talk to us, talk to our residents. So actually, they met with residents.
You used your residents really as an advertisement for what you were about.
They were, would you recommend?
Yes.
That's what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, if you ask yourself that test, how many of your residents would recommend you to another housing association, local authority or whatever, you'd be shocked. And I think, you know, you asked earlier about Tpas and what we've been doing. I mean, I think it was interesting that when Alok Sharma, remember him, was the...
2 housing ministers ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, but when he went
Last year.
round, he was meeting the engaged residents of landlords.
Yes.
And yet they were telling him they were disaffected, they were disengaged, they were not listened to. And these were the engaged residents. So what about all of those who had just given up hope? And I think that idea of listening and actually thinking about it, would your residents promote you to someone else?
Alison.
I think there's something about seeing ourselves as others see us, and I absolutely get that we've had to, as a sector, tell a very, very positive story in order to get government support for the things that we want to do, build properties, whatever. But I think the everyday experience of a lot of MPs is that they get people into their surgeries who are not having a good service. And I think we need to own up to that sometimes we don't get it right. I don't think we're necessarily that good at doing that.
Right.
I think if you're talking about a metric, metrics are difficult. You know, it's like that old thing.
Well, the worry is it gets a bit wishy-washy.
Yeah,
You know,
and
you're
what
not
gets-
sure you've got anything real here, you know.
It could
Oh,
be
yeah, we're
complaints.
engaging.
So something around complaints and something around satisfaction. But, you know, what gets measured gets done. So whatever metric you come up with,
Yeah.
that's where the resources will go, because people want...
Exactly.
So you need that qualitative and quantitative bit of work doing.
Aasia, what would you measure?
I was just going to say, one of the things that we do, we've got, you know, we merged 18 months ago. So with that brings lots of challenges, but lots of opportunities. And for us as a 56,000 landlord covering quite a wide geography, that's a lot of things to consider. But one of the things that we did was that we've come up with a model which kind of works for us within our remit at the moment. So scrutinising services, where residents absolutely get the data, understand where the research has come from, our complaints, our statistics, and we're quite open with that, they can challenge us. We've allowed them to challenge us. So actually, they're getting value for money. And if things aren't good, we can do something about it, because it's tenant-led, and it's absolutely paramount that residents have a voice. And that's what we've tried to do, and we've delivered on that. And actually, residents are getting more engaged with us because they know that we're listening to what they're saying and we're making changes accordingly. So for us, it's working, but that's not to say it's going to stay the same. We'll change, we'll adapt, we'll listen to what residents are saying to us as part of our model, so we grow.
Okay, I want to get back to Slido. Matt Campion has hit top of the pile. Where's Matt? There's Matt. Can we get a microphone to Matt? You've got to, if you don't mind doing it in person, you've written it out. No, that'd be great. Who's got a question on the league tables?
Hi. Will performance-based league tables help or hinder relationships between residents, staff and organisations? And whether you think yes or no, why do you think that?
Okay, you read that out beautifully, Matt. That was very, very good indeed. John, league tables, you touched on them earlier. And is this a sensible way of trying to measure like with like?
No,
Right.
I don't
okay,
think so,
sorted out
because I
then.
don't think you're measuring like for like. I think one of the things about Sovereign is it covers such a wide geographical area that different parts of their organisation will face different challenges. And I think if you're working across 20 local authority areas or whatever it is, it's incumbent on you to recognise the differences there are and actually make that work. And league tables will be a very blunt way of
And again,
doing
you're
that.
stuck with the metrics problem, aren't you? Of actually
And I think
just doing a measure.
even within Kensington and Chelsea, engagement with older people is different from engaging with families, with young people, with different people will have different needs, and we need to be attuned to that and to work with groups. And if you're there, it's your duty to do it.
Yeah, Alison, sorry.
I'm just wondering what the purpose of a league table would be, unless you're going to link it to funding, because I can't think of anybody who is going to be who is homeless or sofa surfing or in immense housing stress, who is going to, when they're on choice-based lettings, is going to say, oh, actually, here's a league table. I'm not going to apply for any of the landlord A's because they're number 38 on the list. I'm going to hold out for landlord B.
But isn't it more of a sort of naming and shaming thing, that actually by different organisations seeing that actually they're lagging behind in sector terms, they think, no, we need to improve our performance here?
But as a sector, well, you know, come on, the one thing we're good at is coming up with a new benchmark that shows, well, I mean, we're all top quartile for, you know, what we all advertise on our website what we're top quartile for, don't we? Not what we're bottom quartile for. I don't think that that's the way to drive improvement. I think there are more subtle ways.
Samia, I wanted to ask you about one of the questions on his from somebody anonymous, but it's got 9 votes, so I'm definitely going to ask it. Is there something specifically different between excellent customer service and tenant engagement? And I suppose there's interesting phrases out there. Customer service is something we think from the sort of private corporate sector. Tenant engagement, something very much from this sort of housing sector. Should we be thinking that they are the same thing, or is there something subtly different between those two?
To say about the language that's used. And again, talking about customer satisfaction for social housing tenants doesn't sit well with a lot of tenants. It does go well hand in hand, and again, it's about understanding services, and many of you tenants don't really, they miss out on that relationship with you, because traditionally, they see the only services that you provide are repair and maintenance services, and they have no other opportunity to get to know you. Now, okay, repair and maintenance are quite a big issue for, you know, many tenants. But I think what we've discovered, and we've had a great relationship with local housing association, the amazing work, for example, that Peabody does around health and well-being, the work that many members here do around sustainability, creating opportunity for local people. So I think if we start looking at those tenants not so much as a customer service relationship type of way, but for you to discover those tenants and work in a different way and get them to know you, and I think that would help in terms of rebuilding the trust, because, and especially in where we live, you are being associated with RBKC, and that's not a good thing. So I think since Grenfell, I've got lots of local residents coming to me and saying, oh, this landlord is not changing my fire doors and this and this, and I have to explain different things. So I think it's worth revisiting that relationship with the tenant and asking yourself, not so much about you knowing who your tenants are, but do your tenants know who you are?
Can I ask, there's another question which I think might be quite interesting. Aasia, you might be able to help us with this. You've talked about the importance of knowing the tenant. Is enough being done to optimize the data that a housing association holds on an individual? And I think during the course of this conference, actually the importance that technology can bring to the relationship between the customer and the product, or the customer and the home, or the landlord. Is there more that can be done in that space, do you think?
I think technology can be an enabler. I don't think it should be the driver for everything. There's something around understanding who your customer base is. And actually, lots of organisations have lots of data which comes through. It's about making use of that data in the most effective way, rather than just collecting data for data's sake. So I think data and technology absolutely has its own mark within the sector. But how you use it is probably just as important, because I think that's how you can tailor your services. That's how you can build trust between yourself and your customers. That's how you can understand what services are better. Like John was saying, you know, we've got stock in Bristol, for example. Inner city Bristol will be very different to our stock in, you know, rural Plymouth, for example. So there's something around understanding the data so it meets your needs.
Is it about asking the right questions? I wonder whether actually, you know, there is a real opportunity. If we're talking about tenant engagement, obviously housing associations are constantly looking at new ways of, you know, whether it's surveys or whether it's literally knocking on people's door, or the relationship they have in terms of, you know, getting the rent paid. There's all kinds of interactions, websites and hubs and all the rest of it. Is there perhaps within that, the moment we tend to be thinking about sort of maintenance and repairs, or, you know, making sure the rent's paid, but actually we should be thinking about it in a way that gets to the sort of customer satisfaction bit?
Can I start by saying I think that collecting data and using that data is important, but it's not an excuse to not talk to people.
Right.
And I think that the conversation we're having would be very different if we were tweeting this. You know, you wouldn't get the interaction from people in that way. And I think there's no excuse for not actually doing all of it. And that, you know, social media, engagement through different means is all important, but it's not an excuse for not actually sitting down and talking to people, getting to know people. Can I give a shout out for an association, Phoenix Association in South London? I know they're small, and I know that they operate in a very distinctive and discreet area. But you walk around with their chief exec, and people know him. People talk to him, people, not just his tenants, others in the community, the local vicar, the teachers, the this, and you know, there is a sense of belonging to something. And it is more difficult if you're big and if you're operating across a different area. But I refuse to believe it's not possible to have something of that relationship if you put your mind to it.
How does Sovereign deal with that being a big organisation problem and making sure that your tenants have got a real face to be able to talk to?
I mean, we're lucky in the sense that we do have offices across our geography, so there is that interaction with staff on a regular basis. When it comes to engagement, when the model we have, when we did our recruitment for our triangle of engagement, we actually went out to different areas. We made sure we looked at geography, we looked at gender, we tried to get a good mix of what our profile of our residents were. And that's helped us because actually we get different points of view coming through to us when we're sitting down talking to them, and that relationship building. And so actually, for us, it's working at the moment, but it could always be better. And like John said, it's going out and doing that face-to-face is time-consuming. But
it also strikes me that there's a slight sort of us and them sense that comes with, you know, here is the landlord, here is the tenant. And in a way, I wonder whether a sort of tenant intermediary, somebody who is there, who is known by the tenants in a block or in an area, but also has a good relationship with the landlord, that can sort of make that work a little bit better. So it doesn't feel like it's, you know, right, there's the landlord, we're going to have a word about this or that. Actually, you're in it, you know, you've got somebody in between.
And I think that's what good old-fashioned housing management does.
Yeah.
I say to groups of young housing professionals, who's that person you go to? It's about, and it's often a woman, it's often an older woman on an estate who's got a sense of what is happening, and you can't build a structure for that. You can't advertise that role. That's just about knowing your patch and walking the streets. It's a bit like, you know, the community police officer, the PCSO, whoever who's wandering around that estate. They just get a sense when things are right and things aren't right. And that's not about filling in surveys. It's not about answering texts or whatever. It's about being human and listening when people are sometimes telling us stuff that we don't want to hear.
I'd go beyond that, though. I think that all staff who work for a local authority, housing association or ALMO ought to spend time out talking to, whether you're the finance director or the chief exec or the HR manager or whatever. Part of your job ought to be understanding what is going on, and actually spending time going out and talking to people is the best way of doing that. And some of it's unpleasant because you'll hear things that you don't want to hear, but some of it is really rewarding. But whether it's good or bad, part of it is about hearing it. And the finance, and I think this is true of boards as well, which is why I made the point earlier. But if you're the finance director of an organisation, you know, the be-all and end-all is not the money. The be-all and end-all is what you're doing with it, and you having an understanding of what's going on.
Yeah. You can't get that from a spreadsheet, can you?
Get that, and you can't get it from a data base. You need to talk to people.
So yeah, one of the questions we've got here is from an anonymous person. Says, is the boardroom the best place to hear the resident voice? Can residents make a bigger impact and influence through other structures? There you can see the question on there. And we're going to come to Catherine Little question in a second. But before we do that, just your thoughts on actually, you talk about the structures that you've developed in North Kensington, but there is a risk, isn't there, that actually the boardroom is really not the right environment. People are not going to necessarily feel very confident in that environment. They're not going to be perhaps as honest and frank, surrounded by a load of housing executives.
I think the challenge for us is that we were managed by Kensington and Chelsea TMO. So on paper, this was the 100% resident-led tenant management organization.
Yeah.
So what could go wrong?
Yeah.
And somehow I'm going back to what you're saying, Alison, those residents' representative had to pay allegiance to this organization and were no longer accountable to residents. So moving forward, we thought about a way that wouldn't transform us into this sort of organization, because it seems that any model of governance that is meant to be resident-led starts really well, and at some point it develops a corporate identity and it goes wrong. So we came to the conclusion that actually we need to separate the strategic from the operational. So we have different structures. And I think, again, it's not us tenants saying we want to be on every board just for the sake of being on a board. I think we want the residents in our community who are the skilled one to be on this board. It's not because you're a tenant that, you know what I mean, it's quite a responsibility, and we have responsibilities as well. So we separate the operational from strategic. And at the operational level, that's how you work better with your residents associations, because they are your eyes on the ground. And I go back to what you were saying, you need to show proximity. You have to have a local presence, and it doesn't necessarily mean for you to set up an office. In our hub, we're telling housing association, you can get an officer there, we can facilitate half a day for you. I ran a quick survey after speaking to different tenants of 4 local housing associations, and I asked one simple question: who's your housing officer? And they didn't know. So you see, from that get-go, you don't have a direct relationship with your tenants, and that's why you've got that disconnect. And
That's interesting. Most people don't know who their
ask,
MP is, mind
that
you,
could
so-
be a KPI. Ask your tenants, who's your housing officer? And I think in terms of local knowledge, we're able to identify a disrepair issue in the south of a borough for that big housing association. So it's how those networks work.
I like that. Now, Catherine Little's question, where's Catherine?
There.
Over there. Hello. I'd just like to sort of take a little bit more on your question. So this is about, as we've been discussing, a sort of sector-wide return to tenants on boards. What's your own view about that? Have you got a microphone? Yeah, it's one is roving towards you.
It's a two-part question about tenants on boards and open shareholding. And my experience is, having just come from an association that's moved back to open shareholding, we were told again and again and again, you're moving in the wrong direction. This is not the direction housing associations are moving in. Associations are shutting down shareholding. It will make things difficult for you. And I guess my question is, actually, isn't that the right sort of difficult? My view is that tenants are our most important stakeholder group. I think there is a place for tenants on boards and, as you've articulately said, on the ground in operational matters. But strategic makes a difference to operational. Who's running you makes a difference to work on the ground, and how much money is spent on community development and all those excellent things you're talking about, Samia. So my question is simply, isn't it time that actually we say tenants are not customers in the sense that they have choice? They can't just bog off to Tesco's and buy a new house and live in it. We should be treating them as if they have all the choice in the world. And I'm really proud to work for an association that has both open shareholding and tenants on
Who is
board.
that?
Broadland Housing. Isn't it time, though, that we recognise there's a gap in accountability, particularly in the housing association sector, and recognise that shareholding, at least once a year, gives tenants the right to vote on the most important strategic matters, like mergers, actually?
Okay. Aasia, would you let people do that with Sovereign?
Well, we do have tenants on our board at the moment, but I think there's quite a lot within that, actually, Catherine, with regards to what you were saying. At the moment, we have tenants on our board, but our structure, which we have with regards to our engagement model, we have a group called our Resident Board Partnership, who are absolutely strategically looking at direction of travel from a resident's perspective, which influences the board as well. So we've got the chair of the board coming to those meetings, really listening to what the residents are saying. So
But if you were thinking about maybe merging with another housing association, would you actually ask your tenants whether they wanted you to do that? And would you include whatever they said in your thinking?
When we've merged, we've always asked for feedback from residents with regards to...
Afterwards?
Well, not afterwards. Well, as part of our governance structure, which we have at the moment, we actually went to our residents once we'd merged. We did some consultation prior to merging, but after we merged, we actually engaged with them to say, actually, what suits you? So we actually asked them what works for you, because actually as two organisations, we had very different approaches. We modelled something which was very much led by residents. They were absolutely part of the discussion. They talked to residents and board members together to come up with a model. So this is very much about co-creation, working together to come up with what suited them. And at the moment, it suits us where we are within Sovereign.
Isn't the problem here, Alison, that you could have a situation where you have two housing associations which want to merge. The clients of both those housing associations really don't like the unknown. They'd rather stick with what they know. So you don't merge. And it's a bit like the sort of iPhone thing. You know, customers don't know what they don't know. They can't imagine that they're going to need an iPhone if they've never seen an iPhone. And actually, that kind of strategic decision, you know, much as it would be nice to ask the tenants, the danger is that they're not really in a position to make that kind of sort of strategic jump that takes you into new territory, because they will tend to stick with what they've got.
I think I've been given the poison chalice here, haven't I? I think in terms of principle, where are we? Boards have the ultimate responsibility for running organisations. There's never a downgrade given to an executive team, and Fiona's sitting there. She's downgraded me on a couple of occasions, but she's never downgraded the people who get paid a lot of money for running the organisations, but there you go. So boards have the ultimate responsibility.
Right.
Okay, but we have different shareholding models. I love the Sohar model. I'm an absolute enormous fan of Merthyr Valley's. You know, I think it's absolutely fantastic organisation. One of the interesting things the last couple of weeks, it's AGM season, so we've all been to lots of AGMs, and you see lots of photographs on Twitter, and the ones where you have an overflowing room with not enough chairs are the community gateways. You know, the photographs that came from the gateway in Preston or down in Phoenix last week, it showed that there was a level of engagement that was absolutely to do with the structure, with the form of the organisation. And in those organisations, they obviously will not merge unless the shareholders agree to that. We're a sector, we're a broad church, though. You can't compare Sovereign with Phoenix. Mm-hmm. They're different organisations.
Okay, John, where would, I mean, this is in a way gets to the heart of this. It's about real empowerment for tenants. Are they just somebody that you consult and then actually you say, well, that's very interesting, but we're still going to merge anyway, even though they don't want to do it? Or do you genuinely say these people can, through their actions, influence the way that the board behaves in a direct way?
Can I just say, though, Alison, that the regulator can actually lead to the chief exec going in a downgrade. So
you don't get nobody's an E2 V2. It's always a G2 V2, I suppose.
I've got no idea what you're talking about.
I agree. but basically, if you get it that wrong, the chief exec
we'll
head
sack
could
the
roll.
exec anyway. Then yeah, don't worry.
So
about
that. There is that.
Right.
But I think the answer is that there are different ways of doing it. But I also think that ultimately you should be listening to residents and making sure that if you think that something is too complicated, simplify it, make it understandable. But actually, if you're asking your communities or residents to agree something some way down the line, you're already too late. Mm. If your way of working is not actually engaging with those people, but you're coming to them at the last minute and saying, we're thinking of this, what do you think?
Then
it's too late.
You're not going to win the battle.
Well, no. And people generally will vote to stay with you because they don't trust you. Mm-hmm. So, if you look at LSVT's, Birmingham being the classic, their stock transfer failed, not because Birmingham was such a wonderful landlord, but because people didn't trust them. Mm-hmm. They also used Ron Atkinson on their DVD, which was a
brilliant move.
But a spectacular own goal. But the bottom line is, if it's in your way of working that people know who you are, will talk to you, will offer you an opinion, John, that was bloody awful when you did that. Or, that was fantastic, why don't you do more of that? Then, when it comes to the big decisions, you're far more likely to get people understanding, which is important, and surprising you with their views of how you can run the business that, after all, affects them far more than it affects you.
Samia, we're coming towards the end of our discussion. I thought it would be quite right to give you, as a tenant, the final thought on this. And I'd like to sort of pick up on that, really, that where we arrived in this conversation, which is about what real empowerment looks like, and to what extent, in the real world, a big housing provider, with all the sort of legislation and corporate governance stuff that they've got to do, can genuinely empower tenants, and how confident you are, given where we are in the politics of all of this, that we can make this happen.
I've got to be confident because we're doing it. If it makes sense, we actually changing those relationships. And sometimes people look at me and say, "Oh, what planet does she live on?" Because we press that reset button, because that night what we see in the area is not only a burnout shell, it's a system that completely collapsed. There were no authorities around, the emergency services, who could have responded to that? So everything we believed in, everything we thought was safe before Grenfell, the way we engage, the role of the NHS, all this was put into question. And even for me personally, as a professional, that was a bit of a wake-up call. I'm lucky to have worked with local authorities, the voluntary sector, European NGOs, so that gave me actually the skills to look at it in a different light, and that didn't constrain me to follow a pattern, because I think what I realized, we've adopted a way of working that sometimes we're complacent with that, and it can be scary for people once you've worked in a certain way for years to change. So yes, I'm confident. I think there's a lot to do in terms of changing the mindset, and I think it's key. I mean, we could tell you should do this and this, and I think it's for you to have that self-belief that actually it's okay for you to do things differently, but most importantly, for you to accept that you can't do this on your own. You're not expected to do this on your own. So revisit that relationship that you have with your tenants, understand the value of working with your tenants, and the same way as the people who work for you, they are the one who makes you who you are. So I would urge you to look at them in a very different light.
Thank you very much indeed. A very powerful way to finish, which I think has been a really interesting. I've learned a lot anyway. I hope some people in the audience have felt that it's been valuable. Thank you all very much indeed for your contribution. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. Well, it's been a splendid day. Actually, a much more encouraging day than perhaps many might have imagined. The presence of the Prime Minister at a time, let's face it, when she has plenty on her plate, tells you that housing matters politically, economically, and socially. And what today has reminded us, and Grenfell was perhaps a tragic wake-up call with that, is that housing, as we've been discussing, it's about homes. It's about homes and the people who live in those homes. It's not about structures and organizations. And the volatility of our politics at the moment, the uncertainty of Brexit and the manifest flaws in the market, I think actually amount to an opportunity to engage with the people that we look after better than we have. And there are opportunities, new technology, new methods of construction, new models of delivery. All of these are disrupting the sector and also offering real opportunity for those who have the creativity and the imagination to seize the moment. I hope that you can seize the moment. There are drinks receptions about to start, literally through those doors. Do go to one of them, refer to the back of your badge to choose which networking opportunity you think will be best. Tomorrow, my friend and former colleague at Channel 4, Krishnan Guru Murthy, will be chairing another full day of summitry here. There is much to be done. I can tell you one thing that you might be able to do tomorrow is if you do care about social housing, the ministry have got a room set aside on the ground floor where you can go and talk to them at certain times during the day about what you think on social housing. So do take advantage of that. If you want to mark it in your diary, 11:40 to 12:40 and 2:40 to 3:40. I'm expecting a long queue there tomorrow. Good luck with that. Thank you so much for today, and please have a very safe journey to your home, wherever it is. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.